And you can see Henry DeGlane, who was the victor in the original Montreal screw job, when the biting bit with Strangler Lewis, when they screwed Lewis out of the title in Montreal the first time in the 30s. He was a former member of the French Olympic team, and he was a big drawing card in Montreal and anywhere there's a French-speaking audience. John Pasek, who was one of the classic old shooters. Dick Schickat, who was a world champion and a classic shooter, but looks a little bit like Eric Cartman there on that. And I think they took the same picture and just changed his hairstyle here.
Now, how did you get so smart to the business as far as the stuff from like the 40s and 50s? How did you study that?
Read.
Just read?
Read and be able to figure it out, because if you get familiar with who the talent was, and then you see names in specific places, you know, oh, okay, so and so must have had an interest, or so and so must have been booking, or this is where they were getting their talent. Like in Memphis, before Memphis was part of the Nashville territory, they got their underneath talent from the St. Louis and the Kansas City area, because you could see the same names. So read, be a detective, surmise, suppose, and then you can put it together.
Is there a gap at all for you, or do you pretty much know everything about the business?
No, there's all kinds of gaps. I just found out something that happened. I'll tell the story later, but something that happened in Louisville wrestling history that I didn't know ever even happened until I went to the library and was researching with this guy for the book we're doing on Louisville wrestling history. So there's a lot of shit, but it's when there were that many territories and that many promotions and that many wrestlers, nobody can know everything. But at the same time, all you have to do is find this shit and read it. Look, Jim Londos. Londos, I guess I would probably have to say Londos, Sammartino, Andre, Austin, and The Rock were the biggest drawing cards, and Hogan in there, but Londos probably adjusted for inflation and for the sake of the times was a bigger drawing card in the wrestling business than Hulk Hogan was. He was a household name in the 30s. He was filling up baseball stadiums. He was setting attendance records everywhere, and in the middle of a depression. Of course, the tickets were 10 cents a piece, but that's what happens when, you're wrestling in the 30s. So every time that we would go when the WWF was on their real hot streak and we'd be at a new pay-per-view and the place would be sold out, they'd say, we can announce an all-time record for Boston. Well, no, you can't, because Londos actually drew more people. You can announce an indoor record or whatever. Kevin Dunn used to hate it. That's why I used to like to do it, because he was so full of himself. He's such an arrogant, obnoxious prick. That we'll announce that we've sold out again and set an all-time record. May have sold out, but so-and-so drew more people in 1946 or whatever. Anyway, I like this section here, especially these old wrestling and TV sports, because there's a Terrible Tessie, Roller Derby, etc. These are classic magazines from the late 50s. The Fan magazine, Rocca, the Pt.6, Gene Stanley, Women Wrestlers, and more Roller Derby. Here is Londos again from, I believe, 1938 on this one, and he's in this he's above Jack Dempsey, and this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. Doesn't that just say this guy's a wrestling champion? Buddy Rogers, just the way he looked, the tan, the belts, the fucking way he carried himself. That's why he was the biggest box office attraction in the business at that time. And of course, iconically, Ray Stevens versus Pat Patterson from the Cow Palace on a Roy Shire show. Have to have that one out. And this, I just got this at the Louisville Flea Market. Ertles Beer was a Louisville beer company in the 50s. And after Leone had the match with Thez in Los Angeles that set the $100,000 house, they got, actually, there's a Thez one of these too that I haven't been able to find yet, but they got this sponsorship business with Ertles Beer. And those are quite rare. The first issue of Wrestling Review, autographed by the Graham brothers, from 1959. Danny Hodges' hometown phone book, Perry, Oklahoma, autographed, the cover. the only wrestler ever in history to get his picture on his hometown phone book. And this one is autographed by Rocca and Red Bastien. It's a late 50s program with them teaming against Valentine and Zebra Kid in New Jersey. And this is, get a close-up of this one. This is unique in the world. The Battle of the Century, they were teasing trying to put together a match between Bruno and Thez for the NWA and WWF championships, and it was a big deal in the magazines in the 60s. But Bruno didn't want Thez's schedule, and Thez wanted $100,000 to do the job. So they never had the match, but I had both these guys autograph this magazine to me personally, and it's fucking clean, too. It's very nice. You can't find them in that shape anymore. This is a New Jersey program autographed by two of the Dusick brothers, the original Riot Squad, Emil and Joe Dusick, along with Sam Miniker and a couple of the other guys that were on the card. They were like the first original heels. St. Petersburg, the Bayfront Center, Briscoe and Funk, autographed by Briscoe. This is an article from the 40s of a wrestler named Jim Clinstock that was murdered in his dentist's office.
How'd that happen?
Alcohol was involved. They said he suddenly became a rave. They were there at the dentist's office after hours, and alcohol was involved, and suddenly he became a raving maniac, and in trying to subdue him, they killed him, and there was court trials and all that other stuff. The Crusher, there's Art Nielsen and Reggie Lasowski, but he signed that for me in like 1999, and the magazine is from 1953, and when I handed it to him, he said, well, that looks like that'd probably be about 1953. Oh, yeah. He 46 years later, and he remembered it. We didn't even do the posters down this side.
Look at all the magazines. The magazines are impressive.
Well, I love these old painted color covers. Let's try that again. Rocket, they took the black and white pictures, but they would hand color them. And it looks so cool, actually, that way. Primo Carnera, Argentina Rocca, Yukon Eric. Oh, this is a classic cover. It's Primo Carnera knocking the shit out of Gene Stanley, but Gene Stanley gets the cover tag. So, but what a picture, right? The wrestling magazines, they started in 1951 when wrestling got popular on network television. Everybody wanted to cash in on it, so wrestling started in 1951, just a couple of months away from official wrestling. And then you had World Wrestling, but the NWA official wrestling actually was tied into all the different NWA offices, and they all got publicity out of it. But then in the 50s, really the early and mid-50s, these Wrestling Lifes and Wrestling As You Like It magazines were really more widespread because they were on every newsstand and every rack.
How often did the magazines come out back then? I remember, like, when I was a kid, it was like once a month, every Tuesday.
These were, for a while, in some cases, they were weekly.
Wow.
See, like this one from July 26, 1952. See, they were weekly, so they were dated, and it was just, it was a 15-cent magazine, but it had all the wrestling news in it. Pat O'Connor. O'Connor was a big cover feature on the early stuff, but oh, I thought I'd find one. Oh, nevertheless. Oh, there we are. Bob Orton Sr., Randy's grandfather. He looks nothing like him. But yeah, these were weekly magazines for a long time there. Then the bigger, the full-size magazines were monthly, most or bi-monthly. But then they started spread out until in the 60s. This was the precursor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. This was, before they did The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling or whatever, London Publishing did Wrestling Illustrated for just a short time. in 1965 and 66, and they were really cool magazines and had great covers. You know, Thez versus Valentine, the Graham brothers. But it wasn't the time then, apparently. And then they started.
Do you have the first PWI?
Yeah. Hold on here. There we go. This is the first edition of The Wrestler, 1966. And let's see, where's the inside? There we go. That's the first, one of the first issues of Inside Wrestling. I don't have the number on the back. But that came along a year or so later, and then Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Is this it? Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, there you go. That's the first one.
Wow. What year is that?
1979.
79?
See, PWI didn't come along until the end of the 70s. The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling were the flagship magazines up until then. But then they did other, like Wrestling Yearbook, Wrestling Annual, Best of the Wrestler, Wrestling's Greatest Battles, Wrestling Picture Book, Sports Review Wrestling, etc., Wrestling Album, Wrestling by the Year. London Publishing did a lot of titles. But then there was the Big Book of Wrestling group that had Wrestling Guide, Wrestling Roundup, and Official Wrestling. And then, of course, there's Wrestling World, Ring Wrestling, Wrestling Review, both the original Wrestling Review and then the Wrestling Review that Norm Keitzer started later on. But these classics, Wrestling Review was a hell of a magazine. This is the second issue. The first one with the Graham brothers is on the cover.
Do you remember going to the pharmacy or wherever the newsstands when you were a kid, getting all of the magazines?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, and I started with comic books at the drugstore over here because I was buying comic books from the time I was 5 or 6, and I didn't know there were wrestling magazines. When I started watching wrestling, I didn't know there were wrestling magazines, and then I found one in a secondhand shop while I was looking for comic books. So now I got to go back and get all the back issues of all the wrestling magazines now that I know that they exist. So It took a while, but you could find this shit easier back then. Look at the Bastine brothers, Red and Lou.
The quality is amazing on these magazines too. They're not even like damaged.
Well, I've got some raggedy ones, but I've searched around trying to find better copies. And then Boxing Illustrated and Wrestling News. See, wrestling and boxing were always grouped together. They were both treated as sports. And they, were written about by the same people that did both magazines. For example, London Publishing had a complete line of boxing magazines also. Inside Boxing. And not the boxer, though, but, you get the point. And then here's the Japanese stuff. And these magazines just blew everything else away, especially in the 70s, because not only the quality of the photography and all the big color sections, but just because they covered the entire world. You couldn't read it, but you could kind of get an idea of what's going on. And I was lucky enough to get a lot of my stuff. When I started taking pictures, a lot of my stuff got printed in Gong magazine, especially because I was a correspondent with Koichi Yoshizawa. I did this layout of Jimmy Valiant and Joe LeDuc at the Gardens here.
Do you remember the paydays that you would get for taking a photo in a mag?
It was better than Bill Apter. Thank you, Bill. Wonderful Willie. No, for a black and white spread like that, it's probably about $50, which back in the 70s wasn't bad. And if you had a variety of shit and some color stuff in, the magazines, where's my Lawler Bockwinkel? It could be a check for a couple of $100, depending on how much stuff you had in the...
How much can you make in a month back then?
Oh, dude, between all the pictures that we were doing at the Gardens, and especially if it was a month where I had my magazine out and I got paid for my magazine that I was having printed, that was a couple of $1,000 right there. So I had $1,000 weeks in the late 70s, early 80s. Some weeks between pictures and ring announcing and, doing stuff for the magazines and etc. Here, this was my stuff in Memphis. That's the first time I saw Bobby Heenan live also. This was 1978. This was Lawler's first shot at the AWA title. Yeah, it was not that hard to. I took a cut and pay when I got in the business as a manager from what I was doing as a photographer and doing the magazines and the programs and things. Let's see here. We'll go, but this is a classic. Have you ever read this? Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George?
I have not.
An old-time wrestler named Brother Frank Jarris, who was actually a Southern Junior Heavyweight Champion for Dick Goulas back in the 50s, his son became a sports writer, and he wrote this book about his days of following his father around on the circuit in the old days when he was a kid. And it was actually one of the first mainstream books on wrestling. It was published by a legitimate publisher, Prentice Hall, and out in the bookstores that kind of told you what was going on with wrestling. This was in 1973 when nobody knew, but at the same time it wasn't a knock, it was more of an affectionate look. So this is the Japanese magazine that covered the scaffold match between Jerry Jarrett and Don Green here in Louisville in 1971. And they even have the fold out. That was the first sellout for wrestling in the modern era at the Louisville Gardens. In Jerry Jarrett's and Nick Goulas' promotional time, because the Gardens had sold out back in the 40s, but not in the modern era. This is a classic. Jacksonville, Florida, May 1962, right? Not a very inventive cover, 2 championship matches tonight, but the second match is Karl Gotch versus Boris Malenko. And a double main event, Don Curtis and Joe Scarpa, Jay Strongbow against the Von Brauners, and Cowboy Bob Ellis and Eddie Gray.